I'm super grateful to get to share with you guys about having just a Ruth-like vision, talking about Ruth. So the title of my lesson is to be a Ruth for your leader, so that everyone can see your progress. And so, sorry, I'm gonna flip to my notes here. Okay, so I want to tell you guys the truth about Ruth. I love studying this out. It was so great. I had so much fun. I learned a lot. But I think one of the first things that I learned and what I learned to appreciate is Ruth's heart and her attitude. She had to make a decision to be a Ruth to Naomi. So let's pick it up in Ruth chapter 1, verse 8. It says, "Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, 'Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me.'" So here we find a desolate Naomi. She's urging her daughters to return back to their old lives, to their families, to their old gods. And so in Naomi's eyes, their work, their allegiance, their loyalty to her was over. It ended the day that their husbands died, the day that her sons died. And, you know, she felt like she didn't have anything to offer them. And maybe she didn't. Let's look at verse 11. It says, "But Naomi said, 'Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand had gone against me." So I think this is really interesting because Naomi knew the odds. She knew that they were against her. She understood that what the reality was, and so did Orpah. Let's look in verse 14. "At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye." So Orpah understood. And you know, sometimes I can be an Orpah. I can look at life through the lens of reality, faithlessness. I can totally miss that boat. I could be not loyal. But let's see how how Ruth reacted. At the end of verse 14, it says, "But Ruth clung to her." And so this is what I want to call you sisters to imitate, this loyalty, this commitment. And so I like to imagine that the reason why Ruth clung to Naomi is because Naomi introduced her to God. Naomi introduced her to this amazing faith. She knew that her odds were better with Naomi and Naomi's God than it was with her gods back at home, with her family, her old life, and she was willing to let that go. And let's look at her proclamation. In verse 16, it says, "But Ruth replied, 'Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you from me.'" This gives me chills every time I read it. This is her proclamation of surrender. This is Ruth. It's Ruth before Naomi. And I think this is amazing. I think this should be all of our hearts, to be committed to our leaders, to be loyal, committed to God's plan for our lives. And then another thing that I thought was really awesome is I think that even in Naomi's desolation, her hardship, she was able to impact Ruth in a remarkable way, enough for Ruth to stake her claim, to be willing to be a foreigner in a foreign land, to be an alien, to be a foreigner in a land where her people are despised. That's what she was accepting. That's what she was surrendering. She gave her heart wholly and fully to this new plan. And another thing that I really love about Ruth is she was industrious. Let's look at Ruth chapter 2, verse 2. So they had entered Bethlehem in the beginning of the harvest. So it was just beginning. And this was Ruth's plan. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." So Ruth had a plan to take over both Naomi and herself. She knew that Naomi was way too old to do the hardship, the work that it would cause to be a harvester. And she knew the law. She was crafty. She understood, what could be done in order to make their lives there successful. And so I want to encourage you. Are you looking for needs to fill? Are you looking for ways you can help your leader? Are you a servant? Do you have Ruth's heart to be industrious, to figure out a plan and a way to make it work? And then let's look at verse 7 in chapter 2. It says, She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So this is a foreman, one of the people in the that are working in the harvest. He's like he led the servants, and he's explaining Ruth's heart to Boaz. He's like, this is her. She's been working since the morning until now. And then if we look in verse 17, it says, "So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening, and then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah, which was about 22 liters. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten." So I love this because it shows how hardworking Ruth was. She didn't give up. She didn't stop. She took a little rest, but she worked from morning until evening, and then she threshed her barley, which means she prepared it, she packed it, and then carried those 22 liters back to her mother-in-law so that they could both partake in her harvest. And then the food that she was given by Boaz, she saved what was left over and provided it to her mother-in-law. And this is a heart of just caring for her leader, caring for the women, the woman that God had placed in her life. Yeah. This is how she served her. And so in 2020, we're not going to be Orpahs, we're going to be Ruths. We're going to take care of our leader. We're going to serve our sisters. We're going to lift each other up, lift up each other's arms. And then I wanted to share one other thing. I want to encourage you guys to imitate Ruth's obedience. Let's look at Ruth chapter 3. Verse 1 to 5. I always found this really funny. One day Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." So I always thought this was really funny because, Naomi has fetched up this great plan. Now Naomi is taking care of Ruth. She's determined to provide for her. And she says, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to get dressed. You're going to put on some perfume, wear your best clothes, okay? Go to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you're here yet. Wait until he's done drinking, he's done eating. And this is like a tradition that a lot of the harvesters did. They'd go to the threshing floor where they would prepare their barley, and they'd spend the night there in order to protect their harvest from thieves. And so, Naomi knew this, and so she's instructing Ruth, this is where you're going to go, and then once he lies down, sit at his feet, uncover his feet, and lay there. And I think this is crazy. Like anybody, could be an Orpah here. They could totally be like, that's a weird plan. I don't like that direction. I don't like that advice. But this is where we could be a Ruth. This is where we can take discipling and take direction and accept it. And be faithful and trust your leaders. Trust that they have God's plan and God's heart in mind, and they're going to lead you. They won't tell you to go to the brother's household, and do this craziness. But they might test your faith. They might take your faith to new heights you've never been before in 2020. Rachel has called me to do something crazy I've never done before. I've always struggled with impurity. Impurity was something that I really had a hard time with. But she's like, no more. 2020, you will never be impure. And I'm like, all right, amen. I'm going to do this. I'm going to take my faith to a brand new height that I've never done before. But I trust it. I totally trust her advice. I trust her direction. And I trust God. And so I just wanted to close with a couple of scriptures in Hebrews 13, verse 17. I thought this was really great. It kind of really goes well with Ruth's heart. It says, "Obey your leaders and submit to their authority. They keep watch over you as women who must give an account. Obey them so that their work will be a joy and not a burden, for that would be of no advantage to you." So again, in your discipling times, do you take their direction, your disciples' direction? Are you obedient to the plan that they have for you? And then in 1 Timothy 4:15, I want to close. Just to encourage you, sisters, to really imitate Ruth's heart in this. 1 Timothy 4, verse 15. It says, "Be diligent in these matters. Give yourself wholly to them, so that everyone may see your progress. Watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers." So be wholehearted. Be diligent to being obedient. Have Ruth-like obedience. Have Ruth-like loyalty and commitment. Let go of your old life, your old self 2019. Open up into this new 2020 and imitate Ruth.